What a field day for the heat down there. 1,000 people in the street singing songs and they carrying signs, mostly saying hooray for our side. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody wrong. When people speak in their mind, getting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop the children, watch that sound. Everybody look, it's going down.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition. I'm so excited to be doing this show, the first show that I've done about the Bernie campaign in the new Bernie campaign. And with me, I've got two great guests from Nevada, and they are Angie Morelli and Rob Kern. How you doing, guys?
Great. Thanks for having us on, Lauren.
Well, thanks.
The reason I wanted to have you on was, Angie, it seems like it was just yesterday, even though it was 3 years ago, we were talking about all things Bernie. But you guys were very involved in what happened in Nevada in the 2016 primary, and what we all commonly call the shit show. and I'm going to read your bios here before we get into it. So Angie Morelli is a small business owner and former Marine who got out of the Corps and took a hard left and became an activist. With her experience working with March Against Monsanto, Black Lives Matter, getting money out of politics, and other issue-based organizing, she started Nevada for Bernie Sanders, became a national delegate for him in 2016, and helped organize the opposition to the party antics in Nevada in 2016. Rob Kern is an activist and highly rated civil attorney in Las Vegas, Nevada. And he was also involved in the Bernie campaign, doing a lot of legal work for these petition appeals, which we'll hear about shortly. So before we get into the meat of the matter, Angie, why don't you tell us how you got involved in that campaign and what you've been doing in the last 3 years?
Well, it's kind of funny because right before Bernie announced that he was running for president, that's when Rob and I met. And we originally met to discuss opening up a Represent Us branch here in Las Vegas, because after all of the years of organizing I had done at issues-based initiatives, I kind of realized that it doesn't matter how much activism we do. If we have the wrong people in power, we're not going to get anything done. So we were in the midst of having discussions about that and getting the money out of politics. And Bernie announced that he was running for president and he was not accepting corporate donations. And it was like a light bulb went off that if we could support this candidate and make him do well while he's not accepting, corporate funds, that would be a turning point for all subsequent elections. So that's where I finished up the March Against Monsanto that year and just started going headfirst into Bernie Sanders.
And what have you been doing since then?
I was trying to finish school because under the GI Bill that Bernie Sanders extended for us, I have an additional 5 years for me to go to school. So I was going to school. I was doing some low-key activism and helping out with some other initiatives and everything, just kind of under the radar. And then just recently dumped myself back into politics once I saw all of the people who were going to be running for president, some of the things that had come out of the DNC since 2016, and really started kind of looking at the rules that prevented us from being able to do a lot about the caucus to convention process in Nevada. The biggest thing is the delegate selection plan, so that's why we're organizing right now.
And that's what we're going to talk about as soon as we hear from Rob, and he tells us a little bit about his background, how he got involved with Bernie Sanders, and what he's been doing since the last campaign.
My story's a lot less interesting. I'm, primarily I'm an attorney practicing here, but I've always really focused on public interest issues. And the one issue truly close to my heart is money in politics, because I think all the others have their root there. And I believe that until we fix that, we're really just, playing whack-a-mole. But that was, I had been complaining to some activist friends about, not knowing anyone in Vegas who was really serious about organizing, and they told me I had to meet Angie. And so yeah, we connected over that, and I was really a fan when I heard Bernie really pushing for the money out of politics, and looked in his background and saw that, he wasn't picking up this issue because it was popular. It's the issues he fights for, seeing that he had been doing that the whole time, regardless of when it was politically expedient. That made me feel like that was somebody worth fighting for.
He was an Occupy lawyer as well, so his activism did not start at Bernie Sanders. He does have some experience when it comes to activists and antics and all of that. So,
well, I was in Occupy too, Rob, and I'm actually looking for a First Amendment lawyer who could sue the California Highway Patrol for false arrest. So maybe we can talk about that afterwards. I was arrested while live streaming the Poor People's Campaign disruption in the Capitol. And it's funny, I just came back from 3 days of citizen lobbying in Sacramento, and also doing some videotapes about citizen lobbying. And I said to the sergeant in arms, I said, "Oh, gee, the last time I was in this building, you guys hauled me out of here in handcuffs." And he had to laugh. Well, anyway, let's talk about what happened in Nevada in 2016, because everybody remembers that. And, this is what led to these reforms that we're going to talk about. Angie, why don't you talk about, for those that don't remember, or for those that weren't following Bernie back then, talk about first what happened in the local caucus, then the county caucus, and then the state convention.
We have this crazy thing here in Nevada called a caucus. It's not a primary. It's this fancy thing where we all have to get into a room in our precincts and declare who we are voting for president. And then after that, a whole bunch of complicated math happens that no one seems to really understand how it works. But we had a lot of issues at the caucus, which we can kind of go over those as we're going over these petition items. Since there was a lot of disorganization at the caucus level, they were not able to accurately provide delegate lists to the campaigns. So subsequently, they had to turn the county conventions, they had to open up the county conventions to where anybody, regardless of whether or not they were elected as a delegate, was able to attend. So since they did that, we had organized effectively enough to where we had turned Clark County for Bernie Sanders, which obviously upset the party. And so after that, we ended up going to organize for the state convention. And what ended up happening was that there was a bunch of state convention rules that we didn't think were fair. They were against Robert's Rules of Order. We thought that they were only going to make an already contentious situation more contentious if they did not amend some of these rules. So Rob and I got together with a few other individuals, and we nailed out specific responses and amendments that they should make, which we had to submit via a petition. So in their rules, we weren't allowed to actually bring motions to the floor at the state convention. We had to go through and collect petition signatures of up to at least 20% of the delegates who attended the convention. We, on most petitions, on 10 of them, got up to 40%, and they still did not hear the things that we were suggesting that they needed to do to make this a more fair convention. Let me make it clear. None of them had
thousands of signatures there.
Yeah, thousands of signatures. It took us hundreds of hours of work to organize this. We had 30 or 40 volunteers the night before the convention and on the morning of the convention. I'm talking, we left at 1 a.m. We got back at 6 a.m. to continue collecting signatures. They refused to hear any of our motions. They gave us a bunch of lame excuses as to why they didn't hear them. So towards the end of the convention, it got very emotional, especially considering they were serving a bunch of alcohol. They didn't have any realistic eating situations for us to be able to compensate that with. So there was very high emotions. There certainly was not violence. But that's kind of what landed us in the space that we're at right now, to where we have a very divided Nevada Democratic Party, because we still feel like most of those transgressions. Transgressions, thank you. Most of the transgressions that had happened in 2016 were not answered to. And so whenever we opened up this latest delegate selection plan and a lot of those things had not been worked in, that's when we started organizing again.
All right. Well, I want to just go back to some of those things that happened in 2016 because everybody remembers the chair throwing incident. It became legend. It was like an urban legend that Bernie delegates were throwing chairs. They were flipping the bird at Barbara Boxer. They were making death threats to Roberta Lang. Did any of that happen?
So the easiest answer to the chair throwing thing is that was a rumor that was perpetuated by John Ralston, who subsequently lost his show on PBS. Out here in Nevada, that was something that I contested with something as simple as saying that as a national delegate for Bernie Sanders, I was doing a lot of surrogacy work on MSNBC and Fox News and everything. And I put it out there, look, we had hundreds of people filming in the last 15 or 20 minutes of the convention. There's hundreds of hours of video of this moment that this chair was supposedly thrown in. And the party themselves have a video of the entire proceedings. Someone please produce one video of anyone throwing any chair at the Nevada State Convention, and I will change my vote from Bernie Sanders to Hillary Clinton. Nobody was able to produce one video. It did not happen. It just flat out did not happen.
Well, what about the death threats, and what about the flipping the bird to Barbara Boxer?
So first of all, the Barbara Boxer thing, Barbara Boxer supposedly flipped us off. Honestly, she did not. That was a doctored video. It was a silly thing that came out of it. It's not a thing that actually happened. She was not polite to us by any means, but she didn't flip us off. So that's kind of a nothing thing. As far as the death threats go, the death threats, that whole story came out. Let me preface this by saying that you know as well as I do, Lauren, that any woman that is in politics that is going online and making a big scene are going to get death threats. They're going to get nastagrams. They're going to get all these different things that happen to them. That's just kind of a side effect of being a woman in politics. So if we want to have a grand conversation about, equality or how we treat women who are like opening up their mouths and saying something, we can absolutely have that conversation. But that was not a unique situation for Roberta Lang. That was something that was orchestrated to combat a press release that Rob and I and a few other individuals had put out the night of the convention to explain to the country what the hell had just happened in Nevada. And we'd spelled out everything like explicitly that this is what happened. This is where the party screwed up. This is the story. Please run with this. And instead of actually addressing any of the issues, like them not giving us, the space on the floor for us to make any of our emotions, they decided to distract us with this story of chair throwing and death threats. And it was all just a distraction to not focus on the fact that they were not being democratic.
Okay, now before we move on to why you decided to be proactive and try to change some of these things, is there anything else that you want to add, Rob, to talk about what happened back then?
I think that, we could go on for a very long time talking about all the things that happened. There was a lot of breaking of rules. There was a lot of breaking of laws. But the reality is anyone who doesn't, there are a lot of people on both sides. Anyone who doesn't believe it happened now is not going to change their mind because of anything I say. So and that's sort of what led to this, is that it doesn't matter whether it was real or not. It doesn't matter whether they cheated or not. What matters is that people believe they cheated, and the setup and the structure of it, there is no oversight. It's not set up to be a transparent process. It's not set up to be a process that has protections against abuse. And that, even if we assume that this was all in our imaginations, the reality is the fact that people believe that it happened means that it tore the party apart. And
right.
And it resulted, personally, I was not a fan of Hillary Clinton, but I voted for her just because I saw Trump as a horrific disaster. But there were a lot of people that just chose not to go out and vote. And, we saw I believe that is directly responsible, not Nevada specifically, but the fact that the party and the Clinton campaign really made no efforts after all this to try to repair that gap. I see that as the reason we have Trump as president. And I think that if we do not create, especially now when there's a lot of distrust in the party, if we don't create a system that has integrity, that people are going to believe in and can see transparency. If we don't do that, then we're going to have a split again, because there's a lot of distrust and a lot of anger that has not gone away. And people are going to assume the worst unless you make the most unimpeachable setup you can.
Okay, now let's talk about the delegate selection process and what amendments that you have. I'm going to put this here right now. This is a website that you guys came up with, which is an excellent website. It's very easy to navigate, and you've broken down the process into about 10 what you're calling amendments. So you got wind of the fact that they were doing the delegate selection process. You wanted to get ahead of this thing. Tell us the process by which you put together these amendments, who worked on it, why you decided to do it concurrent with a petition on change.org, and then we'll get into each one.
So a lot of the issues that we had in 2016 were kind of like brushed off by saying, if you really cared about this, you would have addressed this during the public opinion period for the delegate selection plan. They said that all of this stuff is already like part of the plan, and there's nothing they can do about it because this was published in 2015 and it doesn't matter, they have to stick to this plan. So whenever we started gearing up for this election, and I was looking out for the DNC to put out their DSP, delegate selection plan, and I started with that and looking at all of the new things that they had implemented there. And then I looked at Iowa when Iowa put out their DSP, because their selection process is the most similar to ours, especially considering they're one of the first in the nation, and read their entire delegate selection plan, so that as soon as ours was published, we were ready to go. So we started organizing for this in January. And we've been having meetings like once every few weeks or so to discuss all of the different things that we could potentially bring up, some of the issues that we had that we needed to address whenever this plan came out.
And maybe you can alternate going between the amendments, just telling us what was the problem and how did you decide to solve it?
So to preface this, I do want to explain that for all of the months of research that we had done on this, we could not find a county convention plan. So we assumed that all of the county convention organizing needed to fall under the delegate selection plan for the state of Nevada. We ended up finding out this morning that that might be wrong. We're not still 100% sure. So there's a couple things in here that have to do with the county convention that we're kind of pulling out of the petition because they need to be addressed on the county level and on the state convention level. So let me just say that like right out the door. But I can go ahead and start with the first one. The first one that we addressed was the voice vote challenges. That was a convention plan. We're gonna let that one go until we get to the convention process. The second one is protecting the integrity of same-day registration. I also want to take this one and put it at the end, so we'll talk about that one at the very end. The next one on here was fair and equal campaign notification. So one of the issues that we had here in 2016 that kind of caused a big kerfuffle at the county convention was that we had two candidates and only one of those candidates was getting certain critical information from the county party or from the state party, which was against a private agreement that they had all made together, that they were all going to have equal notification of different items. So this did not happen. So we were asking for them to actually put this into the delegate selection plan, that this is a necessity and that they're bound by it by the delegate selection plan. And after the meeting that we had today, it seems as if the state party does agree with us on this one, and it seems as if we've won that one.
Honestly, our meeting with the state party today went better than expected. It was a very different experience from trying to deal with the state party in 2016. Where we had to fight just to get acknowledged. They sort of reached out to us, and we had what I thought was a very good dialogue. I see Angie making a face. I think we had different expectations. I didn't expect them to just clap and accept everything we brought in, but I felt like they were receptive to more than I expected as far as the proposed amendments.
Prior to having this meeting, you told me that you wanted to attend a county central committee meeting, and they told you that you were not in the NPG van list of registered Democratic voters, you had to go to the registrar and prove that you were registered.
For you to be a part of the county or state central committee where you live, you have to apply for these positions, which is very difficult for you to do towards the end, because all of those positions are filled up. But like right now, like it should be somewhat easy for you to actually get one of those positions. So I had applied, and I was originally told that I was on the list of those people who were going to be on the Clark County Central Committee. And that at the Clark County Central Committee meeting, I would be nominated for the State Central Committee. So I ended up finding out the day before that I was no longer on this list. I was pulled off of this list. I was no longer going to be a county committee member, and that I would no longer be nominated for the State Central Committee. I went through an entire day of having to drive down to the registrar's office, take a video of the girl behind the counter saying that I was registered on this state and I was totally eligible and I was a Democrat. They still decided that they were not going to accept that because they said that they were only operating off of the information that was within VAN, which is a program that the parties use that is super archaic to verify things. That VAN had not been updated by a certain date and that they were not going to accept me. And after pushing back on that a few times, I finally decided, look, I'm not going to fight this. This is the dumbest thing for me to fight right now, considering all the other stuff that we have going on. So I decided to just go and attend the meeting as a guest. I listened to our caucus director go through her plan and thought that she had good enough vibes that after she got off the stage, I walked up to her and I was like, hey, I'm Angie Morelli. We submitted this petition. Can you please tell me what you think about it? And she seemed to be very open and very excited about some of the ideas that we had. We pointed out some errors and holes that they had not considered. And we had discussed having a meeting, and that's how the meeting today happened.
Yes, but you also told me that that the actual chair, the current chair of the Democratic Party, is not only is a Hillary supporter, but her current cover page on Facebook shows her posing with Hillary. And of course, you know, that gives us a lot of pause because the split between the Bernie people and the Hillary people has not really healed, even 3 years later.
Yeah, that is frustrating. Let me just point out, that's not the chair. She's the executive director. It was a cause of concern, like when you're coming from like being a Bernie person in 2016 to see that all the people who are currently leading the state party were so heavily associated with Hillary Clinton. I have to say, after the meeting today, I don't feel that way anymore. I mean, I think that you know, this is where I get burned, but I want to be optimistic about the dedication that these people have to making this a democratic process. And this is our test. This is the whole reason that Rob and I did this, and the rest of the group that put this together, is because this is our first test. We want to be like, hey, we're being nice. We're trying to present these things in a very equitable way. These are very good suggestions. If you're saying that you're going to implement them, great. We'll find out tomorrow when it gets published. And if they're published, then apparently, yes, they are listening. I mean, quite frankly, the people who are now the chair, the executive director, and the caucus director are all millennials. They're a much younger generation. They seem much more open to all of the different suggestions that they're getting. So, you know, regardless of party affiliation, let's say, you know what, this is the test across the country. Everybody, if you want to test your state parties, you need to go read your delegate selection plans, put in your public comments, and see what happens. And then that's a very good way to have a barometer as to how the rest of this convention or primary season is going to go for this election.
Well, you know, I want to get to some more of the amendments, but first I want to mention that when I came to Nevada for the caucus, I brought my son, and we were in a precinct in an elementary school. The caucus was being run by the wife was a Hillary supporter, and the husband was a Bernie supporter, and they had their kid who was helping run it, was also a Bernie supporter. And it ended up, I guess you could say there were maybe 5 precincts in the one elementary school, and it ended up splitting evenly between Bernie and Hillary. So if that family can get along, that's like a metaphor for the rest of the state and the rest of the country. So do you want to continue on talking about the amendments? Because this is all things that people should be looking for. People that are involved in their state delegate selection process, their state Democratic parties, they should be listening and paying attention to these things since you've done all the research.
Okay, so number 4 is give the district level voters at least 50% of delegates. So this gets a little complicated and we don't have a resolution to this, and I'll explain that in a second. So basically for the state of Nevada, we get 48 delegates. Because of the blue wave that we experienced in 2018, 12 of those 48 delegates are going to be super delegates. I know that they call them automatic delegates, they're super delegates. They just renamed them because of whatever. So we're going to have 12 super delegates. That's 25% of our delegates are going to be super delegates that are unpledged. We have a concern for that because in 1984, when they decided they were going to introduce super delegates to the Democratic Party, they decided that they were going to cap that at 15%. So that's a little alarming. So we try to do something about this because there's this whole like confusing situation in Nevada with like district level delegates and at-large delegates and pledged PLEOs and unpledged PLEOs. So we try to refine this, and just to try and simplify this as much as we can, we tried to take one of the at-large delegates, which are generally associated with the caucuses that happen on the Strip for the union workers and all the shift workers, and give that back to the district level so that we would maintain 24 delegates and have at least 20 or at least 50% of our delegate count coming from our district level precinct elections. Now, where this got confusing at this meeting today was that the people in the room swear that the at-large delegates are not apportioned by the at-large caucuses. So they also explained that they were now renaming the at-large caucuses Strip caucuses to try and help with confusion. So the follow-up question was, of course, well then, where are the votes going for the people who are voting on the Strip? And no one had an answer for that. So out of the meeting today, we now have to wait for them to explain, A, where the votes go for the Strip level delegates, or for the Strip level votes, where those delegates end up going, if they go down to the precinct level or what. And B, if that's the case, then why do we have district level and at-large delegates broken down in our delegate selection plan, which they also did not have an answer for? So
let me ask you a question about the Strip, because we all know that Harry Reid, or how Harry Reid put his thumb on the scale. Harry Reid and Bernie make like they're great friends, and they're very collegial to each other. And Harry Reid made a great show of saying how he was going to be neutral in 2016. And yet we all know, it was not a secret, that he contacted the Culinary Workers Union, which is the largest union representing all the employees there at the casinos and the restaurants, and told them to caucus for Hillary. And he also contacted all the casino owners and told them to give them the day off with pay. And I was there interviewing people, and I spoke to a lot of workers who were in their cars going to and from their jobs, and they said, hey, if they had the day off, they would have loved to caucus for Bernie, but they didn't get the day off. So in all your amendments, are you trying to deal with that circumstance?
This was a topic that we discussed at length through multiple meetings. We had originally thought about trying to potentially like get rid of the Strip level caucuses, but honestly, like Nevada is just a very unique place. We are open 24/7. We have so many more workers that are working these crazy shift jobs. With the addition of early voting or with the early caucus and with the virtual caucus, yes, it does seem as if that might be unnecessary. That was a bridge we decided, what was the saying, like a bridge we decided not to die on, or I don't know what.
Yeah, a hill you're not.
The hill that we decided that we were going to die on. So we decided instead that we were going to try and remove one of those delegates and put it into our district level, and we would potentially next time. Honestly, we're going to be pushing to go to a straight primary. Like the caucus is archaic, it's ridiculous, it's not working, it does not work for today's politics, it does not work for the amount of people who participate. That's down the road. We decided to try and address some of these smaller issues.
It's also not very private. I mean, one of the other things I remember hearing about that was that the union bosses were there kind of looking over the shoulders of these workers to make sure that they voted the right way.
It's not a secret ballot, so anyone who's in the precinct room can see who you're voting for and supporting. But yeah, neither of us are aware of whether there were bosses watching or anything like that.
Yeah.
The issue number 5 was the one I considered very important, which is why I assume Angie handed that off. It's not going to be something that applies as strongly in primary states because the caucus process has some unique challenges as far as tracking and auditing what actually happens at the caucus. It's a fairly chaotic thing when you basically think about the fact that the entire population of the state has to do their voting in person during the same 2 to 4 hour period throughout the entire state. The way it was done before, there was essentially no paper tracking of who voted for whom. So it was just, each precinct chair wrote down how many people in that room voted for this person, how many for that. And so what we ended up with was a system where that was combined together with a lot of people on the site who just weren't properly trained, who didn't understand how the system worked, and were overwhelmed. And the result was you had many people who were supposed to be organizing this who didn't understand how to organize it. You had a lot of people doing the delegate math wrong, which meant just completely skewing the calculations of who gets what delegates. And at the end of that, you didn't have a paper trail to do an audit or track or correct anything. So you ultimately just had a big mess of chaos, and everyone was forced to, after that, say, yep, it was chaos, lots of rules were broken, lots of people's votes weren't counted, but nothing to be done about it. And that's a pretty horrible way to run an election. So that was what we wanted to avoid. So our focus here was, we had thought about a lot of different things, and we thought the most viable thing was simply to make each presidential preference card, which is sort of like a ballot, have people write their preference on it when they're at caucus, and have those, each one with a unique number so that they can be tracked to each person, and require each precinct to keep those stored so that we would have a paper record to track everything, to, if there's any allegations of wrongdoing, bad math, not counting votes, that would theoretically allow both campaigns and the party to go back and audit that and find out, make sure that we have legitimate results.
So I want to cut in right there and say that basically the biggest problem that we had was that in the Unity Commission report and in the caucus to convention thing that they had done, to where they're supposed to be getting all this feedback from all these different individuals about what they should do with this delegate selection plan. Both of those plans had called for a proper auditing technique to be able to go through and verify these results because of all of the issues that we had coming out of the caucus in 2016. The current delegate selection plan doesn't have the word audit one time.
There absolutely has to be a way to track this. And one change we have that was already put in is that instead of each convention changing the delegate count, the delegate count would be locked based on the results of the caucus, which is good because it means less gamesmanship in the conventions, but it also means that ensuring that things go right and are trackable and verifiable at the caucus level is significantly more important. So we brought this issue up. We wanted to be able to keep this paper record, to be able to track who voted where, especially because we're doing early caucus and virtual caucus now. We want to be able to verify that people aren't voting twice and that type of thing. We also had a proposal about having testing to make sure that the people who are running the sites actually understand the rules they're supposed to be following and the process that this is supposed to work on, and having paid staff, that type of thing. And we even proposed an auditing committee, which I still think is an excellent idea. But ultimately, we brought that to the party, and they were largely receptive to the idea. They agreed on the need for tracking and being able to preserve paper record for all the voting at the caucus. We have not agreed on if the numbered preference cards are going to be the method for that, but they are going to be discussing with us some ideas they have for doing that. As far as the staff, they agreed that they are going to do a lot more money and a lot more training to make sure that everyone and as many people as they can is fully trained and tested for understanding how that's supposed to go.
Number 6 is concerns with the virtual caucus. Look, we're all very concerned about this. The DNC put out like very clear and new rules saying that we need to better, allow for absentee ballots and for a bunch of different options for allowing people to participate. We were unsure about this just because there's not a plan for it. Like there's no details that are provided. All of the questions that are asked about it are not answered with any kind of real answers. So this is something that a lot of people are very concerned with. But quite frankly, I don't really want to go through all of the answers that they gave us. I feel sufficiently, I feel like their answer was sufficient as to what's going on with that. They don't have the answers, but they absolutely have to do it. They're mandated by the DNC. Once they do have more information on it, they are going to be publishing a more simplified and exact plan as to what they're going to be doing with the virtual caucus. And so once they do that, they're going to put the plan out. They're going to be asking for feedback. So that's something that we're going to kind of just let go until we actually see that plan for it. So the next one was the precinct locations. This was a big one for me because one of the things that we had happen in 2016 was I was one of those crazy people that didn't just go and knock on all the Bernie doors. I went and knocked on every door in my neighborhood and I was like, hey, let's talk about Bernie Sanders. Actually, let's start off with this. What are you registered as? Do you know when you're going to the caucus? What information can I give you? And so when I provided all this information to my neighbors, Hillary people or Bernie people, about where you're supposed to go and register to vote, I went and knocked on everybody's doors at least twice. 48 hours before our caucus, they changed our precinct location. And they did not put out any kind of announcements. There was like the only door knockers that I saw were the door knockers on the doors of all of the Hillary Clinton people. But I basically had to like go through and knock on another 100 doors and retell everybody where their precincts were if I even got a hold of them. And that's insane. Like that, no campaign has the capacity to do that unless they're just targeting their own inveterate voters and they have a heads up, So
yeah, well, that was clearly rigging because I was out there knocking on doors too, and we ran into that same situation with people. So yeah. So what's your fix on that one?
So our fix on that was that we demanded that they lock in the precinct locations by February 14th, which would be a week before our caucus plus a day. So then that way, that would give us at least a weekend and a week for us to go through and re-knock on any doors that we need to do. And they saw that and they raised it, and they are now supposedly locking in the precinct locations by January 15th. So that's something that we won. And then number 8 was no voting before everyone can register. That was a convention rule. So we'll just pass that one off until we get to the conventions. The number 9 was about impartial credentials and teller committee appointments. I won't get into the details of this because we ended up figuring out that since we got the information that all of our delegates are locked in at the caucus level, we don't need credentials and teller committees anymore. Those were also for the conventions. So that's not a need that we have. And then number 10 was no electioneering and caucus opening remarks. So here in Nevada, whenever we went to our sites, we would get to our sites, we would register everybody to vote, and then I had to get up and read 3 or 4 letters from Harry Reid and Dina Titus and a bunch of other elected officials saying, hey, welcome to your caucus. By the way, vote for Hillary Clinton. And that's just such an egregious, ridiculous thing that they had us do. And that's definitely electioneering. And that's not something that should have happened. So that was one of the things that we put in there is like, hey, have us read all the letters that you want, that's fine, but you're not electioneering for one candidate or another. That's ridiculous. So I thought this was going to be an easy thing for, like, that they would not be able to argue with us about. They kind of took the stance that, like, we're not going to tell Harry Reid what to say. And I'm like, fine, don't tell him what to say, but tell him that if he's electioneering, you're not going to make your volunteers read these letters to these sites, because that's ridiculous. So it seems as if they are going to do kind of like they do want to put in language saying that it's not recommended that they do this. So I do still want to put in a motion that we have to submit by Saturday, saying that we want definitive language that if electioneering is in these letters, that they definitely will not be read. But that's the last thing that we had on this list. We did have a couple other things that we just wanted some clarification on. One of them was as simple as, and this is stuff that I want y'all to know about, because this is things that you need to be thinking about. One of the things is that we have our presidential preference cards are coming in Spanish, and now they're coming in Tagalog. And so if we're doing presidential preference cards in these additional languages, we also need to account for instructions as to how to participate in your caucus that are also in these additional languages. That's something that they had not thought of. That's something that they are now going to be implementing. We didn't do a petition on it, but they ended up doing it anyway. The other thing that we had asked about was their plan for ties, which was also kind of interesting because I don't know how familiar you are with this, Lauren, but in 2016, Iowa solved their ties. So by ties, let me explain. So when you're in a precinct, you've got 20 people in this precinct. In 2016, it was real easy. Say half the precinct voted for Hillary, half the precinct voted for Bernie. They would solve that with a coin flip, because that's democracy. Yeah. And there's a lot of issues that came out of Iowa with all of the different precincts that they had to do that with. Here in Nevada, since we want to be all cute with it because it's Las Vegas, we decided that we were going to do this via a deck of cards, which was also deciding our democracy with a deck of cards. So we decided, so this time, like, we've asked, like, this question has been asked quite a few times of the state party of, like, hey, how are we handling it this time, since everybody hated the solution last time? And the solution originally that they have been giving was that they were just going to add additional delegates, which doesn't make any sense.
Well, I think that they had corrected that.
They corrected that, yeah. But so basically, I was like, you can't do that, and that's when the lawyer ended up stepping in, saying, like, no, like, she's right. We did it this way before, so they're going to have to look into that. But that was the question that we had. But this is just an example of, like, we can't rely, like, it's unfair. It's unfair for us to rely on a few people to put together all of these different things, like the caucus or whatever, and for us to just rely on them to do this perfectly. Like, people like us that did experience all these problems in 2016 should be taking a few hours of our time to read through these delegate selection plans and point out all of these oversights. And today seems like a very good lesson. And, they are more than willing to hear you out, and potentially, like, we can all make the selection process better for us this time around. We just have to pay attention.
I really want to commend you both and whoever else worked with you on this, because this is a tremendous amount of thought and a tremendous amount of work that you've put into this, and how you're advocating for democracy. I mean, really calling it democratized democracy, not only is it sort of a tongue twister, but it's really true. I mean, That's really what we're talking about. If we can have a democracy, somebody said, I can't remember which presidential candidate was talking about it, but they said all ballots have to be, everyone who wants to should be able to cast a ballot, and every ballot needs to be counted. So this is, this is what you're talking about, but on a much more local level. And I don't think I was wrong when I teased this program in an earlier Facebook post today to say it really doesn't matter how many farmers markets we table at, or how many organizing for Bernie house parties we run on April 27th. If we don't get this delegate selection process down, we're screwed. I mean, Bernie's screwed. And I want to ask you another question, and I'll put this to the both of you. People, not just me, I've heard a lot of people say this on Facebook and Twitter, that people are starting to get very suspicious about how many candidates are declaring for president. I mean, we just had Michael Bennet run. I mean, why would you have Michael Bennet and John Hickenlooper, who I call Governor Frackenlooper, because they're both from Colorado. They're both centrist Democrats. They're both big fossil fuel recipients. And so thinking and I'm hearing that what they want to do is make sure this goes to the second ballot. Because the whole thing about the Unity Reform Commission that Bernie's very proud of is getting rid of the superdelegates. But he didn't really get rid of the superdelegates. He got rid of them for the first ballot.
Yes.
So you can see if they have so many candidates, then it may be inevitable that they go to a second ballot and then the superdelegates come in. What do you guys think?
So when you get to the Democratic Convention, it works the same as the Electoral College. So the Electoral College, like, you have to have a certain amount of votes for you to actually get the nomination for you to be president, right? So if you don't meet that threshold, then it ends up going to a different plan. So it's the same thing with the Democratic Convention. With the Democratic Convention, we have to have a certain amount of delegates. So like Bernie Sanders, for example, would have to have a certain amount of delegates. If he doesn't have that number of delegates, it's now now called a contested convention. So that means that all of the rules kind of go out the window. And especially with what's happened with this Unity Commission is that, yes, we technically took away the vote of the superdelegates for the first round. But we are for sure, in my opinion, heading into a contested convention with all of these people running, especially like if it was just like a bunch of randos running, that would be one thing. There's a bunch of establishment Democrats that are running, and there's no way that they would be running if this is not an orchestrated effort to take us to a contested convention that would subsequently make it to where our 15 to 25% of superdelegates are now actually going to be deciding who is going to be nominated.
I'm going to offer the boring opinion here. I don't think it's going to lead to a contested convention. It doesn't matter how many establishment candidates you put up there. That's not going to change the number of establishment voters you have. A huge number of establishment candidates, the only effect that's going to have is to ensure that the establishment vote is split in that many directions. I think that Bernie Sanders is going to get the vast majority of progressive votes from the start. And I think once other progressives drop out, they're clearly going to go his way. So I don't think these establishment candidates are going to have any luck diluting the progressive vote away from Sanders. So I think that the reason we're seeing so many people out there is just because everybody sees Trump as a softball, and my cat could probably win an election against him if they did it.
Please, 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 wherever you're at, please, as soon as your delegate selection plan comes out, you need to read it. You need to go through it and read it. It doesn't matter how much texting you do. It doesn't matter how many meetings you're doing. If somebody in your organization is not reading through your delegate selection plan, and if you're not actively trying to improve it, then you're just as much to blame for all of the chaos that's going to happen later on. Like we all need to work on this together and put together like these amendments to try and fix the selection process. This is how democracy works. And for you to do that, you need to register as a Democrat. It sucks, I know. I exited at the Philadelphia convention, and it was very painful for me to join back into it. But that's the only way that we're going to have any power for us to be able to do anything about this. For you to vote on your county conventions, or for you to vote on any process of this, like any of this, you need to register as a Democrat now, and you need to try and join your county and your state central committees. This is very important. And then you need to go and volunteer for all of those positions. You need to be a volunteer for your precinct captain. You need to be a volunteer for your site leads. Like, you need to volunteer for all of these positions to make sure that you have a grasp as to what's happening in your community. Please go and pay attention to that.
Great. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. I just want to promote some upcoming programming that I'm doing. And so I'm going to say bye to you both.
Thank you, Lauren.
Bye. Thanks, Lauren.
This is democratizedemocracy.com. You guys should go on that site and see what a great job they did. And any of you who are working in your Democratic parties in your state, take a look at this show from the beginning. If you tuned in late, share it with your friends. But in any case, citizen democracy is very important. I just came back from a 3-day lobby trip to Sacramento, as I mentioned earlier. And I was following 3 bills that I'm very supportive of. One, a bill to establish public banking in the state of California. Another one to stop the excessive use of force by police officers. And a third one to rein in charter school expansion in the state. And I went to some committee hearings. I went to some lobby visits with members and with staffers. And it's really important that citizens do everything they can. You know, too many people feel they can go out, they can hold a sign, they can chant, whose streets, our streets, show me what democracy looks like, go home, post about it on social media, and their work is done. Well, that is mobilizing. That is not organizing. Organizing is knocking on every door, as Angie was talking about. And yes, we had LA for Bernie volunteers also who ignored the directions of campaign staff to just knock on Democratic doors. They knocked on every door because they knew that Bernie appealed to people other than just, you know, likely Democratic voters. And as a matter of fact, I would put to you that the likely Democratic voters are the ones least likely to vote for Bernie. They would be the Hillary supporters. I don't have a specific robust opposition lined up yet. I've got a lot of stuff to edit. I covered the strike of the Uber and the Lyft workers before I went out of town. I want to edit up that. There's also a challenge to an ADEM election. This is what we have in California. We have the Assembly District delegates. 1/3 of our 3,000 delegates are elected by the grassroots. And what's been happening is the elected officials, our superdelegates, if you will, have been putting their thumb on the scales by putting together slates. And in this one assembly district I went and visited, AD 51, there were 3 slates, all calling themselves progressives, but one was put together by the elected official. That slate had the Teamsters pay for a bus to bus in these seniors from the senior center, paid for the field, provided meals to everyone who was, you know, voting for their slate. We had some very dogged delegates on the progressive slate that was made up of mostly Bernie Sanders supporters, issue activists, who challenged that process, by the way, and they actually won their challenge. So that election has to be held again. So it shows you that if you put in the work, you can achieve the results. And so I'm going to end my show the way I always do by saying, along with share this show and follow me on Twitter, Lauren_Steiner, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Lauren from LA. Keep fighting.